When I say the word worship, what do you think of? Does your mind think of a shrine or memorial where people go to worship something or someone? Do you think of people bowing down? When we hear or speak of worship, we associate that word with many things. One of the things worship gets associated with often is the segment in church where we sing. It's usually before or even after the sermon, and it's a time when believers get to lift up the name of Jesus through song and worship the living King. This is why we have things like a worship service and worship leaders, because in this context, worship denotes singing. And to be fair, that is a form of worship. But let me ask you, is singing the only way we can worship God? The Bible uses the term worship in various different ways. But do you know one of the ways that often gets overlooked? It's worshiping God with our bodies and how we live. The way we live in our everyday lives can, in fact, be an act of worship towards God. I never had a clue that this was a reality. The way I grew up, we sort of pigeonholed worship to just singing. But according to the Bible, worship is so much more bigger than that. In fact, in Paul's letter to the Romans, he gives us a brief snapshot into how worship is more than just singing. He said, "I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." Wait a second. Paul is taking this one word that gets used in one way and is saying that our lifestyle has something to do with worship. Paul is basically saying that in everyday life, we can live in such a way that worships God the Father. This means worship isn't just a time slot on a Sunday program. Worship isn't just an event. Worship isn't just a one-time thing. Paul is saying that we can worship God in the everyday, mundane activities of our lives. The way we shop, eat, drive, run errands, post on social media, interact on social media, all of those mindless things that we tend to do can be considered worship. I don't know about you, but for me, prior to reading this passage years ago, I never knew that to be the case. I currently have two children under 2 years old, two boys, Denver and Dallas. And I gotta be real with you, when my wife, Crystal, and I are changing diapers, making bottles, telling our oldest no 17 million times a day, it doesn't feel like we're doing anything with God. But Paul would say, and God would say, that every single thing that we do in our life in reverence to God is spiritual worship. Thinking back to our passage, the phrase that stands out most is the phrase living sacrifice. Typically, a sacrifice is something that has to die. And once something is dead, you can't sacrifice it anymore. But Paul uses this small phrase to remind us every single day our living can be a sacrifice to God. So in light of that, let me ask you, how does knowing that your everyday life is a form of worship change the way you approach your day?